Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Rats on Film, the show where a bunch of film rats talk about and rank movies. On the show today, we're going to be talking about one of the rats' favorite series, Mission Impossible. I am your host, Xander, and today I have with me Buck.
I'm Buck.
Tim.
I have chosen to accept the mission today.
You are so cool.
That is a pretty cool intro.
Meanwhile, Buck is going to get us taken down for copyright infringement.
This podcast will self-destruct in 10 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
Earlier in the show's run, we did our favorite films of 2023. Buck here put forward the 7th installment of Mission Impossible as one of his favorite films of 2023. I'm a big fan of Mission Impossible. Tim is also a big fan of Mission Impossible.
I wasn't on that episode, but that would rank highly for me too.
So we're going to do the whole series. Now, we've talked about Mission Impossible as a group quite a lot over the years, and I think there's going to be some stuff that's a consensus and other stuff that's going to be really interesting to see where it falls. All right, you guys want to get into it?
Let's do it.
First movie, Mission Impossible, 1996, directed by Brian De Palma. I love this movie.
It's
I
brilliant.
Think it's great.
It's so fucking wonderful.
It's really good.
It's not like the rest of. It's not like what the franchise became. It's really Mission Impossible did like the whole Fast and Furious pivot. It's smaller, but it's also the direction is just wildly different than anything we see up until 7. I feel like 7 is the only movie that remotely comes close to referencing this, like the camera work.
Well, we can talk about it as we go along, but they all have a different vibe to them. The style is all its own thing, and right out the bat, the first Mission Impossible is a very Brian De Palma film. He has his tropes that he loves. He's a huge Hitchcock guy, big on suspense. You know, he's done a lot of thriller films, and Mission Impossible is one of them.
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting because when you say Mission Impossible now, I think the conception is that it's an action series. And this movie definitely has action in it, but to me, it's really more of a spy thriller.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, and that's from the opening sequence. That whole opening sequence is like paranoia from a mission gone bad. It feels Hitchcock. It feels De Palma. It's not big bombastic.
I
stunts.
mean, Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt, the main character, never uses a gun once in the movie.
You know what's interesting about that? For me, one of the things that I would say is a core tenet or foundation of Mission Impossible, and specifically of Ethan's character, is this idea that he's this altruistic being who kind of always tries to do the right thing, always tries to look out for the innocent civilians, the world, his team. And almost without realizing it, I feel like that fact that he doesn't use a gun sort of is setting up that trajectory that he's going to go on over the course of the series.
Yeah, he becomes an archetype, and they comment on it even in the later ones. But here, you know, they're still figuring things out for sure.
He is looking out for everybody, but will he sleep with his best friend's wife? Probably, and that's what the villain's plan is, like, gunning on. I like how much of this movie is not clearly defined. For like an action blockbuster, it's pretty opaque, and the story kind of moves along, and you got to be keeping track. Like the Book of Job stuff, the Vanessa Redgrave stuff, it all just moves at a clip. And I think if you wanted to poke holes in the plot of this movie or like plot lines, you probably could. But the style and the pacing and the performances from everybody, I mean, this is one of my favorite casts.
I really like this movie a lot. I think the opening sequence of the movie is incredible. And I think there's another incredible sequence in the movie, obviously, when they steal the disc from Langley.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Which is, you know, probably the most iconic scene
for sure
in the series, one of the most iconic scenes in movie history.
I mean, it was spoofed how many fucking times. The masks were introduced in this too. I mean, the whole immediate opening before the pre-titles.
I love the heist. I'm a big heist guy. And I think you were talking about earlier the way that Brian De Palma built suspense. I think the fact that you in the theater are sweating as you're watching Tom Cruise's sweat drip off his face and potentially set off an alarm in this super high security room is just excellent. It rules. And
they do a great job in that scene, like setting up beforehand all of the rules. Yeah, the way things can go wrong.
Hey, and then everything does.
Can we shout out the rat?
Gotta shout out the rat anytime there's a chance. I think those two sequences are great. I think besides that, I think the movie is kind of more just fine for me.
Yeah, I feel
the plot is interesting, but it never really grabs me. It's not sort of living up to the potential of a Brian De Palma suspense thriller, I think he has much better films than this. And I think the finale of the movie, the final action sequence,
I love the
climax, it's not my favorite in the series. It's not bad, but it's not my favorite.
I still think, in spite of how, green screeny that sequence is, I think they did really good work. You can feel the wind in that sequence.
Yeah, the practical wind stuff is really good.
Honestly, the POV of Jon Voight dying has lived rent-free in my head, where he shoots himself.
There are some really good 90s vibes, particularly if you love movies in the 90s using technology. There's some great, floppy disks, of course. There's, them sending out emails using Usenet and all that stuff, and some good 90s fashion, and a great needle drop at the end, Cranberries.
So being first in the series, this gets the honor of starting at the top of the list uncontested. We're going to move on now to Mission Impossible 2, 2000, directed by John Woo. We talk about vibes on this show. We're going to keep talking about vibes on this show. John Woo is a vibe. I really do like some of his work. Hard Boiled, Face Off, The Killer. He's got some good stuff, but he has a very, very specific and distinct style. And John Woo is very specifically John Woo. It's funny you talk about Mission Impossible. We said in the first movie that it felt very much like a Brian De Palma movie. This feels very much like a John Woo movie.
100%. Huge stylistic departure.
And they took really stylistic directors and kind of gave them the reins to do what they wanted to do.
It's a pretty big risk what they did, if you think about it. They waited 4 years to make a sequel to a successful movie. And I know it wasn't like a runaway success, but it was still like, it made money. And they're like, oh, we're going to wait 4 years, then make a new one that's completely fucking different.
It's interesting talking about switching up the directors and everything. And really the through line is that there is no through line, but also the through line is Tom Cruise, who's the producer, who's making these choices.
And Paula
wants
Wagner.
To work with these different, Paula Wagner for the first few. And this feels like, to me, the first movie where Tom Cruise has figured out what he wants to do with these movies, which is the most insane stunts you've ever thought of.
The movie opens for no apparent reason with just this free climbing scene.
But where he's doing it all, and
it's wild.
It has no relevance to the plot. It's just
him on vacation,
purely establishing
his
what kind
vibes.
of person he is.
Yeah.
I feel like we should say we all love Tom Cruise. Definitely a weird guy, but he's very committed to his craft, and we really just love watching him on screen, and the stuff that he makes is always amazing.
There's a lot of qualifiers about Tom Cruise, but also he's my favorite actor of all time. So.
I kind of agree. The fact that he's going out there, his goal is to entertain, and I think that there's very few people working nowadays who that's their main goal.
You can't really talk about this movie without talking about Gun Fu. Shows up a ton in this movie. He loves the slow-mo, loves diving with guns. It's very reminiscent of some of his other work.
But it only shows up at the end. Like, I think the last 40 minutes of this movie are outstanding.
There's a couple other scenes.
The Gun Fu, but the slow-mo is throughout.
The slow-mo's throughout.
It's a very Chinese filmmaking sensibility. I mean, if you watch any Hong Kong cinema, you're going to see slow-mo being used, especially to accent action. It's just a style choice, and it's something that he's done in pretty much all of his work.
It's very operatic. It's very dramatic, very melodramatic.
He really loves the slow-mo with a ton of moving elements, the sparks, the birds. And it's something that really does create a really dynamic frame when you're watching it.
And the flopping hair, the majestic hair.
Oh, yeah.
Crucial to this movie.
I'm going to say this right now. I love this movie so much, but a lot of it does not quite gel. It works amongst itself. But I just think the last 40 minutes are so successful that it kind of makes the rest feel weird.
In a lot of ways, it's not the best movie ever. I mean, it's not. I like it.
I'm a thumbs up to this movie. I'm like, if someone is asking, should I watch Mission Impossible 2? Very rarely will I say no.
I hesitate to say it's not good because actually I think it is good.
Yeah, I enjoy it.
But John Woo's style is very heavy here. And the plot, the script is maybe not bad. Very good. And I think ultimately it is sort of a love it or hate it kind of movie. I think we're sort of falling on the side of love, but you could very easily not like this movie.
But it's going to be ranked low.
I would say for me, this is probably the weakest villain in the series. Now, admittedly, I don't think anyone would really rant and rave about the villains in the Mission Impossible series. I mean, they're pretty much just kind of bog standard this guy's got a nuclear device and is going to destroy the world, or this guy's got a super virus or whatever.
Same old.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. And I mean, really, at the end of the day, these villains and plots just sort of become the catalyst for Ethan to do his stunts, which is all we really want to see anyway. But this one just feels kind of the weakest. I mean, this guy's trying to extort money out of a bioengineering company.
I think the villain is an interesting idea. He's, Ethan's opposite number. He's like the evil Ethan.
Alex Trevelyan.
But he just doesn't really, I mean, when you're going up against Tom Cruise, he doesn't really stack up. He's just not very compelling. He's not very charming.
There's nothing about him where I feel like he's gonna win. I will say this though. I do find the cigar cutter scene very effective, and we're talking about things that make you cringe. Like, I think one of the best directed scenes in this is that cigar cutter scene, because I feel that I'm like rubbing my pinky right now thinking about his henchmen getting the pinky cut.
Now, talking about climaxes, last movie I wasn't a big fan of the climax. This movie, it's maybe my favorite part of the movie. Incredible, like, goes on forever, it seems like, but it's kind of fun. Like,
they kind of double up the time with the slow-mo. You know what I mean? They milk it a little bit.
Exactly. And the jousting motorcycles, and the knife in the eye, another incredible stunt.
Yeah.
The motorcycle chase where he just is on a motorcycle, jumps off, puts his feet on the ground, and is just like essentially surfing on asphalt next to the motorcycle while he's getting shot at.
This is like Mission Impossible at its coolest, maybe. I mean, or certainly the 2000s idea of cool. You've got like the new metal soundtrack, it's very,
the sunglasses,
very capital X extreme. Yeah, the sunglasses, the motorcycles.
I mean, I'd be having a Mountain Dew watching this movie, hoping the X Games were on afterwards, playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. It's gonna be a fucking ride.
It's a vibe, and it's fun, and it is cool, I think.
We like it, but we're gonna put it under 1, correct?
I think we're all going to be in agreement on this one. We all love Mission Impossible. We love this movie. We love all the movies. But if I were to show these movies to someone and say, these Mission Impossible movies, this is one of the best movie series out there. These are incredible action movies. I would maybe give a disclaimer about Mission Impossible 2.
Yeah.
I think without a doubt.
All right, moving on to Mission Impossible 3, 2006, directed by J.J. Abrams. Now, this is an interesting one based on our conversation. We've been talking about how they got very stylized directors. Directorial debut for J.J. Abrams, or I should say feature directorial debut.
Feature directorial debut, although he had worked as a director on a number of shows.
Felicity.
So it's interesting, though. I would say he's not really someone who could have been considered a stylistic director at this point in his career because he hadn't been doing it for long enough. But he's certainly someone who becomes a stylistic director. I think a lot of people will say like, oh, the lens flares, or oh, the big sweeping camera moves. And you can see some of that stuff kind of starting out in here. But again, very different than Brian De Palma, and also very different than John Woo. Very much its own thing this time.
Yeah, in hindsight, you can definitely see the stylistic quirks, the whip pans and the extreme close-ups,
the tracking shots.
Yeah.
He's honestly though, JJ would get pounded constantly for like, I know, listen, I don't love all of JJ's movies, but the one thing I will say is that man knows how to block and move a camera. If we're talking about John Woo, Michael Bay, like all these people who were like known for moving cameras, and JJ I think is one of them, especially at that time, but he's fucking good at it. Like, there's always a reason why he's moving the camera. He's moving it. Like, I think I rewatched this fairly recently, and I think this is so well shot. I think the shots are so deliberate and so kinetic in a way that's not just for the sake of moving the camera.
He's also, I think, one of his greatest skills is editing. Mm-hmm. I think his blocking has improved even further from what it is here, but he's always been really good about distilling things to absolutely as concise as they can be, and keeping a really good breakneck pace from start to finish.
It's interesting you talk about the editing. In my mind, one of the hallmarks of this one that sets it apart is the cold open. It starts at essentially the end of the movie, and it jumps back and you kind of follow forward, which is not a structure that any of the other Mission Impossible movies have. They usually have cold opens,
but it's not a jump forward.
They tend to be a separate mission or some kind of villain setup. But this one is the climax of the movie, teased for you right at the beginning, and it really sets up the stakes. And we talked about the villain in the second movie. I think Philip Seymour Hoffman in this movie is by far the best Mission Impossible villain. He's
probably the best one, bar none.
In this movie. It's insane.
The late, great Philip Seymour Hoffman, incredible actor, and this is an amazing performance.
No,
he honestly doesn't even have that much to work with. He's not in the movie that much, but he is really good. And also, he's good as the villain, and he's good as Ethan Hunt playing the villain.
He does the best Tom Cruise. I mean, forget about Ben Stiller impersonating him. Philip Seymour Hoffman does an amazing Tom Cruise. I usually hate cold opens that jump forward. I think it's a lame, boring device. However, I think with how this movie then has its first scene with Ethan out of the game in domestic life, engaged to Michelle Monaghan, I think that whole open of showing where we're going to go and how frightening that could be. It's another Mission Impossible movie that's pretty violent just in the performances.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I would say for me, the action is not the strong suit of this movie. This one kind of goes back to being more drama and suspense oriented.
Yeah.
In a way, it feels more De Palma than it does John Woo, definitely.
And the violence comes in the interrogation scenes and things like that. And it's really well done. But just going back to what we said at the top, like we all love Mission Impossible. But for me, I think, and for all of us, I think the thing that we really love about it and the thing that keeps us coming back to it is the action.
Yeah, it is an action series first and foremost. What really works about this movie for me, and it's kind of going off what Buck said, are the stakes. Very personal stakes.
It's the first time we get personal stakes.
First time we get personal stakes, and you have Ethan's personal life, which is not something we've really seen. He's getting married. Something about Ethan is that he values other people's lives more than him.
Right.
Yeah.
So he has no fear of running towards the fire, but now he has someone else who's depending on him. That's a big change for him. And the other thing that's really interesting is you see a lot more of the IMF in this one.
Yeah, true.
And sort of
the offices. The first time we see the offices.
Yeah, and there's the walls are closing in on Ethan, and there's someone in there on the inside who's mucking things up, and there's a lot of interesting drama and suspense to go along with that.
So actually, for me, this one's a little bit tricky to rank. I would definitely put it above 2, but I could kind of go either way on 1.
No, 1's better.
For me, it's easy. 3 is better than 1.
Ooh, so you guys are split, so I get to decide. How fun. I mean, it's tough because I like both of these movies, but I don't think either of them is the pinnacle of the franchise for me. What I would say is that I think they're both the suspense-oriented ones of the series, so I think I'll edge out 3 because I think 3 is the one that has the more well-done suspense.
For me, 3 just hits harder consistently. 1 has the great sequences. For most of that movie, I'm like, yeah, this is pretty good. But 3 is constantly hitting, and it ends really strong. For me, that's a big part of these movies is how they end.
Yeah.
The climax, the final sequence. And for 1, it's not bad, but it's fine. It's on the lower end of the series. I really like the ending of 3.
All right, so the current list is Mission Impossible 3, number 1, Mission Impossible 1, number 2, and Mission Impossible 2, number 3. Super annoying to say.
That's the worst way.
The words mission and impossible are starting to lose meaning.
Yep. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, 2011, directed by Brad Bird. I love Brad Bird. He rules. Incredibles rules.
Iron Giant
rules.
Absolutely.
He's great. So weird that he did a Mission Impossible movie, but it also rules.
But it makes sense. If you watch Incredibles is like the ultimate spy movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, so like the fact that the guy who did Incredibles gets a Mission Impossible movie to do whatever he wants with. And this is where I feel like the series takes a pivot down the lane it's going to go for the rest. Even though that pivot kind of starts with 3, with story wise at least, I feel like 4 is the pivot of like, all right, here's the archetype of these big stunt sequences that are going to be what the franchise becomes.
Now, really quick, correct me if I'm wrong. This is his live action directorial debut, correct?
That's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah. Not too shabby for your first go behind the camera, so to speak.
His directing is really clean. It feels like, to me, so far of the 4, it feels like the least distinctive style, but that doesn't mean that on the whole that it's not a distinctive Mission Impossible, and the tone and the spirit is really distinctive. But his directing is excellent. I mean, it's very, very clean.
The Burj Khalifa climb sequence, I think, is arguably one of the best action sequences in this franchise. It's tense, it's thrilling, it has all the stuff that we have from 1. You know, it's similar in you're stealing something, there's things that might work, might not work, and there's a bunch of other things happening at the same time. It's awesome.
One of the things that I really love about this movie is this is the first one that leans really hard into the team dynamic. In all of the ones that come before this, there always is a team. He's always got people that are working with him to achieve the mission. But in this one specifically, those characters all kind of have their own objectives, their own personalities, and you really get to get invested in them and what their role in the mission is. It's not really just guy in the chair, guy in the helicopter, whatever. They have a lot more at stake in the story. And the
inter-character dynamics, the team dynamic.
It's the whole movie.
It's a very fun movie. It's easily the funniest up until this point, and the funniest overall.
It's like the comedy one. I also, Brad Bird also said he not wanted none of the technology to work in this.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the Brad Bird effect. Like, it is sort of it is a bit goofy. It is a bit like throwback 60s spy movie. It's just a great time. When I first saw this, it was like, easily, this is the best Mission Impossible.
Oh yeah, oh sure. Yeah, without a doubt.
So good. It's so much fun from start to finish. The breakout of the Russian prison, the break into the Kremlin.
The Kremlin.
So many great little bits.
Even though I think the tone deviates a little bit from here to there in these later movies, I think they really solidify what the tone is here. And like, it's kind of that going forward. Also, even though it's been in all these about Ethan wanting to protect people, it's really in this one. He has to stop a nuke from blowing up San Francisco. I also think it's interesting getting what you were saying earlier about this is where the team dynamics are formed and he really cares about the team. But it's really interesting how this team that doesn't want to be together has to be. And we really see as a result of that how much Ethan cares about the people he works with and the world.
Yeah, Brad Bird does a lot of really great work in all of his films of circumventing your expectations. You know, we talk about the tech not working. We talk about the team not really being a team that wants to be together. He really hits you with the unexpected. One of my favorite moments is when they kick the assassin out the window. They so specifically are like, we have to keep her alive. And just in all the chaos, she gets yeeted right out of the window of the Burj Khalifa. Amazing.
Yeah, it's almost like a cartoon sensibility. It's an animation sensibility.
Absolutely. It is.
The visual gags. If the movie has a downside, I sound like a broken record, but the climax of the movie is probably the weakest part of it. Again, I'm not going to even say it's bad.
I think it's good,
but it just doesn't
live up to the rest of the movie.
Doesn't live up to the rest of the movie.
I'm with you on that, Tim. It's interesting when you talk about this movie having the best action sequences of the series so far. The final sequence in this doesn't really stand as one of those.
And part of that too is it's a weak villain in this one.
Yeah, for sure.
They didn't write the villain well. This is like another MacGuffin. I mean, they're all MacGuffin type movies, but it's like that's not why I come to this one.
Yeah,
I like the device of this automated car park. Like, you telling me a fight where Ethan Hunt and the villain are slowly getting more and more injured, and they can barely move in this car. It's yes, a good idea.
I do enjoy it. Yeah.
Could it have been
again the cartoon sensibility?
Yeah, it's the cartoon sensibility. Also, I love Ethan Hunt saying "mission accomplished" as he hits the button, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, if he had said that in any of the other movies before this one, it would have been such a tonal. It's
very tongue in cheek.
Even though Anthony Hopkins does say this is not mission difficult. This is mission impossible.
Yes, that is true.
I know we kind of said this already, but where are we going to put it on the list?
It's 1.
Can we just go straight to 1?
For sure.
Yeah, we don't
need to waste the time.
This is awesome. This movie fucking rocks.
I mean, I had seen all of them before this one came out, but this one definitely stands out in my mind as the one that was the first time that I went, oh, I really love Mission Impossible. All right, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation 2015. This is the first time that we get Christopher McQuarrie directing. And again, to be a broken record, we've got some shifts from director to director. This is the director we'll have for the rest of the series, but I think that he really stays more so in the Brad Bird vein than the ones that came before.
It feels like the first proper sequel to me.
Rogue Nation does feel similar to Ghost Protocol in a lot of ways. The team dynamic carries through a lot of those aspects that have been established up until this point are carrying through. Tonally, it is similar in some ways. There are some good gags, there are some goofy moments, but it does feel a lot more serious, and it is a lot closer to that sort of thriller suspense.
Oh yeah.
Sort of approach that the first movie had. In a lot of ways, it feels like a combination of all the movies that came before it.
Yeah.
This one feels the most 60s to me. Like if I was to be like, which one do I feel like would be a direct adaptation of the 60s show, I would say this one. Just because it's like from the get-go, it's like we get an action sequence. We have that awesome plane stunt, which is unbelievably cool. And it's very, the theme's pumping. And then there's misdirects throughout. There's internal espionage with Alec Baldwin at IMF. There's so much going on in the spy realm.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about the 60s influence, this one borrows a huge trope from spy movies like James Bond, where the syndicate feels very much like Spectre, this kind of ghost shadow organization that's pulling all the strings behind the scene, and you have your main character really up against it to try and defeat them. And
they're targeting Ethan too. I think that's a big part of it. This is the first movie where you get like Ethan the myth. I love that they're starting to build that. This is the Ethan Hunt is the living manifestation of destiny movie. This to me is Mission Impossible at its most Mission Impossible.
Absolutely. I was going to say that. Yeah, this is like the ultimate Mission Impossible movie. It seems like they almost set out to make it that way. This movie has for me two bests for the series. It has the best plot, I think.
Oh yeah.
I think it's
makes
airtight
sense.
And it's interesting and it's suspenseful, and there are great twists and turns.
Rebecca Ferguson.
And that's the second best.
I can't believe we haven't talked about it.
It has, in my opinion, the best character in the series, which is Ilsa Faust.
Yeah, I mean, she's wonderful in this movie. All of her action work and her performance work is kind of unrivaled, I think, by anybody else in the franchise, except Tom Cruise. Except there's something about her. She might be my favorite character in this series.
I honestly am surprised it took us so long to bring her up, because she is so far ahead as the best secondary character who's not Ethan in the series.
And her story is really compelling with the British government. Yeah. And she keeps trying to get out and they keep pulling her back in, and she just, it's tragic in a way.
I think they really tried to focus on building out a protagonist narrative here. I mean, everyone has stakes in this personally.
Yeah, well, I think as Ethan becomes more and more calcified as this, godlike figure with this very rigid set of rules and morals and ideals, it makes sense that they're sort of bringing in someone to play off of him, a foil, someone who sees Ethan's ideals and maybe agrees with them, but doesn't, have the luxury of necessarily doing the things that he does.
Yeah, I think we should touch on the villain as well in this, since we've done it for some of the other ones. Solomon Lane. I mean, clearly they thought he was a good villain because they used him twice.
I think he's good.
I think he's one of the better ones in the series. He has just a really creepy aura around him. Honestly, it kind of harkens back to Philip Seymour Hoffman in Mission Impossible 3, where on the surface he doesn't seem that threatening, but in the scenes and in the way that he carries himself, you really are put off by this character. One other thing I want to touch on that we talked about on the other movies with this one, and this kind of goes back to Ghost Protocol specifically, is from a structure perspective, the climax of this one for me is also not the highlight of the movie from an action perspective. Yeah. I think Ghost Protocol really escalated the action in this series. Obviously, the standout action sequence in this movie is the underwater sequence where he holds his breath for some ridiculous amount of time, but the ending is very much not in that vein. The climax is very much going back to that interpersonal drama, suspense, tension kind of vibe.
And I think it works really well. I think it's really impressive actually that this movie is essentially saying, yeah, we can have a great motorcycle chase, and yeah, we can literally put our star on the side of a plane taking off in real life. And there's the opera sequence, which is incredible.
Yeah, rules.
But then to say, yeah, we can do all of that, but we don't need to do that to have a killer, really engaging, really suspenseful climax. Where's this one fall? I'm curious.
I think the highs of Ghost Protocol, I don't know. I kind of prefer this to Ghost Protocol, but I love Ghost Protocol, and I feel like Ghost Protocol changed the franchise. And if I had to pick which is my favorite, Ghost Protocol, but which one do I think is a better film? It's this one.
Tim, are you the same?
Well, yeah, it's interesting that we're going straight to the top, but yeah, I think I'm going Rogue Nation above Ghost Protocol. I wouldn't always have always done that, but I think on my last few watches, Rogue Nation is ultimately the stronger.
I mean, this one's definitely a toss-up for me. I think overall I usually prefer 4. I love the action, and I think the action is stronger in that one. But 5 is super consistent, super tight, and I really love that one as well. So if both of you guys are going for 5, I'm fine with putting 5 on top. All right, now we're getting to the good stuff. Mission Impossible Fallout 2018, once again directed by Christopher McQuarrie. This movie's fucking awesome.
Incredible.
It's so perfect in every way. The action, the storytelling, the fact that it loops back to 3, and it's still like, this is where it becomes. I mean, we're talking about how like these movies kind of raise their own stakes in terms of where they fall in the cinematic landscape, but I feel like this one is where it really, Fallout becomes its own thing.
It does almost seem like with 5, they were like, let's make the ultimate Mission Impossible. And now in this one, they were like, let's make the ultimate action movie, which in a lot of ways it is.
It might be my favorite action movie of all time.
It's definitely up there. I mean, they did something really interesting that I really love, which is they kind of took an approach from Hong Kong cinema where they kind of showed up and went, what are the action set pieces we want to make for this movie? And then they just kind of built the story around that. The Halo jump sequence is incredible to watch. The helicopter at the end is just mind-blowing. It's just all so great.
And all the stuff in between, the bathroom fight.
Yeah. The bathroom fight is so fucking cool.
The foot chase.
Yeah.
The car chase.
The whole
the motorcycle chase.
The buses into the water, or the trucks into the water, like the stopping the attack. It's great.
Now, this is the first time we have a returning director, Christopher McQuarrie.
Yep.
But I do think it's interesting that he is very aware of the fact that the first 5 movies all had different directors and their own identities, and he tries to keep that alive. And I think he does a really good job. It does feel very distinct from Rogue Nation. Part of that is he has a different DP, he has a different composer. Those are huge. But in general, it's just, it has a different feeling. It's got a harder edge.
Which it's kind of funny. I'm a very, I like fun in these movies, but the harder edge works in this. I think this might be the best tonal balance of all the Mission Impossible movies.
I mean, I can't think of a movie that's come out in the last few years that was as exhilarating as this to watch. Maybe Top Gun Maverick, but there's something I really value and all of us really value, which is action movies for the sake of action and creating a movie to design good action. There's such an art form to that is lost sometimes in movies that are just, action is kind of an afterthought in them. And this is such a great example of a movie where the action is the absolute priority, and the groups of people that are designing these sequences, executing these sequences, and filming these sequences are just really at the top of their game.
I feel like movies get compared to rides a lot. This was a fun ride. This was a thrill ride. This movie is a real thrill ride, for real. This is like, I think of this as like a drop tower ride. Just the constant up and down, no time to catch your breath.
And we've talked about the climax in most of these movies. This one specifically has one of the all-time greatest movie climaxes, I think. Just everything they're doing here, the intercutting between the helicopter and Ilsa and Benji, the way that everything keeps escalating, the helicopter crashing, fighting on the edge of the cliff, it's just amazing.
There's a lot of best parts of
There's a lot of this movie to love.
And that's why the movie is so good.
Yeah, and I think it also helps that it probably... I know we talked about Philip Seymour Hoffman being the best villain. I kind of like Henry Cavill.
I think he's really good.
Yeah.
I just think he's so evil and so fun. I think it's very rare that you can have that balance done so well. And he's evil from the beginning, but it still works.
Well, I love that moment where he gets found out and he turns the switch.
Yeah, it's so cool.
This one does go really hard on Ethan's strict rules. Yeah. He refuses to believe that at any point he has to choose between saving one person or another.
One brunette for another.
In his mind, he can save both, and he does. And that's why we love him.
Number 1, baby. Let's not waste any time.
Yeah, let's not waste any time.
Absolutely. Number 1.
Love Fallout. All-time movie for me.
Yes, this is at number 1, where it may remain forever.
Last up on the list in this glorious, glorious franchise, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, 2023. Once again, directed by Christopher McQuarrie. Could they one-up Fallout?
I think I went into this one expecting that it wouldn't one-up Fallout. I was saying, that's okay. Once again, he's brought it in a different direction.
Yeah.
He's not trying to do the same thing again. The fun is back. It's a very funny movie.
It's such a goofy movie. I was going to say, it might be the goofiest of the series.
Even though it has character deaths.
Yeah, it's very hyper real. Talking about Goofy, it is a bit cartoony. It's a bit more that Ghost Protocol vibe. I mean, the car chase is incredible comedy, incredible stuff. This is the only Mission Impossible movie with a falling piano, and for that, it gets really high marks for me.
That train sequence is insane. It's so unreal, but it's unrealistic, but yet I buy it.
I really love practical action, and we've already touched on this with Tom Cruise in these movies. You know, he was on the side of a real plane that took off. Insane. And I just love any time that you can see that the action being done is being done for real, or as real as they could safely do it. And they're really doing that in all of these films. If you watch VFX breakdowns of this movie, yeah, there are VFX in almost every one of the action sequences, but you can see how much they're actually doing in camera. And it's just a difference that you can really feel when you watch it.
Absolutely. And there's some interesting stuff with the characters here. You talk about Haley Atwell's character. There's an interesting introduction to how you get brought into the IMF. Something, I mean, it's funny that we're 7 movies in and they're only just now discussing this, because we didn't need to know, which is great. But now we're sort of seeing, in a lot of ways, inside the mind of Ethan Hunt. We're getting a bit deeper into his psychology, which is so interesting. He seems like such a rock, so impenetrable, but it's very a fascinating turn for the series to take, and to show a little bit of hints of an earlier life for him.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice. And then to show that, and to have Rebecca Ferguson die, and to have it be out of his control, I've long hated that, because I kind of just hate that action sequence. I think I don't love that sword fight so much, and I hate that they killed her. But yeah, I think for what they're doing to the Ethan Hunt character, it's like, how do we push this character in the movies to like change who he is, or to see who he is, I should say. It's cool. It's good writing.
Yeah, I'll defend it. I mean, first of all, I love a sword fight in any movie, but I think it fits in this sort of over the top kind of version of Mission Impossible. None of us wanted Ilsa to die, but it is a scene that for me had a huge impact. You know, it's heartbreaking. I've never felt that emotion watching a Mission Impossible movie, and it does hit, and you see how it impacts Ethan's character, which is, you know, of course, the whole point.
I think for me with this movie, why it doesn't really rank as high as Fallout is it's just a bit more clunky. It just really isn't as streamlined. There's too many cold opens in it.
It's 3 cold opens. Yeah. Just open on the scene with Carrie Elwaves.
I know some people were saying that it's goofy or stupid, the AI controlling the world. I kind of love it. I think it kind of rules. It's one of those things where here we are a year later and people are kind of like, oh, is that what's about to happen to us? There are a ton of great set pieces in this movie, and I really like a lot of them. The airport is super fun. The car chase in Rome is awesome. The train, the motorcycle jump, all that stuff is great. I just don't think they nailed the connective tissue in this one as well as they did in Fallout, which is why I just don't think it kind of hits those same peaks.
The movie overall is really good. And yeah, it's not as good as Fallout. It's not as tight, but I think what it does really well for the most part. I really love the AI storyline, the entity. Yeah. I think that is, in my mind, one of the best villains in the series. I think it's a very interesting choice. It goes into what I'm saying, like this sort of hyper real version of the series. It is in some ways half a story, and they are setting up things that may pay off later.
I mean, to give this movie some huge props, I think it does a great job at actually feeling like a standalone movie, more so than a lot of Part 1 and Part 2 movies end up doing.
I do think it is clunky in some ways. It could be tighter for sure, but I find the plot really enjoyable in this movie.
All right, what are we feeling about this movie, guys?
I have a real hard time with this movie. I had a hard time when I watched it because I thought it was clunky, but there's some parts of it I'm like, this is like some of the highest stuff in the franchise, and I just want to continue seeing it go down this route. I would want to tie this with Ghost Protocol. Am I allowed to do that?
No, come on. You got to go above or below.
Well, it's a community effort.
I would tie it with Ghost Protocol.
It's better than Ghost Protocol in my mind.
Really?
Where are you going to put it?
I think it's better than Rogue Nation also.
Oh, I don't agree with that.
Tim, I'm with you. Here's my thing. I love the villain. I think it's super goofy, but I think it's super awesome. And at the end of the day, I've said this a bunch on the show today, I love these movies for the action. And for me, this movie has the second best action in the franchise other than Fallout. And since I like the villain, I like the plot, and I think it's a really fun movie, and the action spectacle in it is the second best in the series, it's number 2 for me for sure.
Rogue Nation, the action is really good, but for me, it's on the lower end. Like, those set pieces aren't as memorable to me. They aren't the ones that I think about most when I think about Mission Impossible. It's a big swing to bring Mission Impossible into this realm, and I really appreciate that 7 movies in, they're still trying new things, and I think they're doing a really good job at it.
So I might change my mind down the road, but I can appreciate why you guys are ranking it second.
So are you going to rank it second, or are we going to meet in the middle here?
I could slide them around, and it depends on my mood on the given day. I don't have a problem with these top 4 being in any order except that Fallout's number 1.
Yeah.
All right. So the official Rats on Film list for Mission Impossible, starting from the bottom going up: Mission Impossible 2, Mission Impossible 1, Mission Impossible 3, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, and the big cheese of the show, Mission Impossible Fallout.
I feel good about it.
Listen, that is literally my ranking of these movies. So
really?
I'm very happy.
So you won.
I won.
Too. It's not a competition.
I mean, that's the beauty of this series, is they're all good.
In a way, this is almost the perfect series to do for this show, because this is an example of a franchise where we really like something about all the movies that are in it. And it's just kind of fun to sit down and talk and debate and try and rank them. Thanks so much for listening to Rats on Film, everybody. Be sure to follow us on Letterboxd. We'll be posting this list and all the future lists we make there. Rats on Film Pod. Let us know what you think of this list. Let us know what list you'd like to see us make in the future. You can also follow us on Instagram, Rats on Film Pod as well. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back soon for more movie lists.